All right, good afternoon, everybody. It's PennLive Opinion Editor John Mysick. We're here with Governor Tom Wolf for the second of two endorsement interviews with the editorial board, and for the next hour or so, we'll be putting our questions and yours to the governor. So thanks for coming, Governor Wolf.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Usual drill, we offer our guests an opportunity if they want to give a brief opening statement, or we can dive right into questions, whatever your pleasure.
Yeah, no, go right ahead. I'll take your questions.
Okay, well, is there any scenario where you could see yourself supporting or calling for taxing retirement income?
No.
Why not?
I think that's one of the things that I mean, people have worked long and hard for their retirement income, and strikes me that that's a long and hallowed tradition in Pennsylvania.
And if reelected, do you see yourself continuing the moratorium on the death penalty? And if so, is there any situation that you can foresee that will cause you to say, okay, we have to lift it?
I want our system of justice to be fair, and I put the moratorium on waiting for the bipartisan Senate Commission to make their report. They did make their report, and they recommended the moratorium. So I will continue that.
I mean, given that, since there's been a de facto moratorium in effect since 1999 and now one for the last 4 years under yours, I mean, does it serve any purpose in law at all for Pennsylvania to have capital punishment?
The report suggested, and I think it's right, that more work needs to be done to make sure that when the death penalty is meted out, it's done so in a fair and equitable fashion. And the commission met for a number of years and was unable to come up with definitive data to suggest either that it was or was not. So they recommended a continuation of the moratorium.
All right, well, and I apologize for flipping from one subject to the next, but you know, since we don't have a debate, so the school funding lawsuit. So it's my understanding that the administration has flipped the position, and now you are supporting the plaintiffs in that lawsuit. And if the court would rule in the favor of the plaintiff and your administration, that could result in like a $3 to $4 billion increase in education funding. So if I was just wondering how you would anticipate the state being able to cover that, and or would you implement that court order?
Yeah, I mean, I have made a historic investment in education in the first 4 budgets since I've been governor, and I will continue, if I'm given the privilege of being governor for another 4 years, will continue to protect education and continue to invest in it. This is the William Penn lawsuit, right. I think you're talking about, and that is an unusual situation. It was actually started before I was governor, and I'm named because the office they're suing is the governor's office. But I actually ran 4 years ago on this issue that Pennsylvania needed to invest in education, not divest, and so it was an awkward situation. I think there's some constitutional issues, separation of powers. I think the court does have real challenges in trying to determine constitutionally. Am I getting too far in the weeds here?
No, that's fine.
I think they have challenges in trying to appropriate taxpayer dollars. They're not really set up for that and haven't been. This is them telling us that if the plaintiffs prevail, that the Commonwealth ought to do a better job and a fairer job of funding public education. I agree with both of those things. So it remains to be seen how the General Assembly and the Governor's Office live up to this challenge, and if the Supreme Court agrees with the plaintiffs, how we move forward with that. But again, it's in line with what I've been trying to do in the 4 budgets that have become law since I become governor.
Do you see the Commonwealth being able to come up with the kind of money that this lawsuit could result in $3 to $4 billion?
We'll have to work together. Again, I'm proud of the fact that I have done these things, invested historic amounts in education, expanded Medicaid, focused on the opioid epidemic and a lot of other things to help families and make lives better in Pennsylvania. But I've done these things in a fiscally responsible way, so balance the budget, put money into the rainy day fund for the first time in 11 years in July, and I will continue to look for ways to do whatever it is we ought to do to make lives better, make Pennsylvania a fairer place in a fiscally responsible way.
Just I wanted to follow up then on the in your first term you said you wanted to invest when you were running. You said $1 billion, replace the $1 billion.
Right.
Do you have a set dollar amount that you'd like to see the
No.
education funding?
Do I have a set? No, I don't have a set dollar, but I think Pennsylvania is one of the lowest in the country in terms of the state's share of funding public education. And I don't know how it is in other states. In Pennsylvania, that puts a big burden on property taxpayers in most jurisdictions around Pennsylvania. So we have to, the state has to step up and do a better job. I don't have a specific figure, but I ran on that 4 years ago, and I will continue to look for ways to invest more in education if I'm given the privilege of serving another 4 years.
You mentioned property taxes, which is the bane of a lot of people's existence, and also a key part of funding public schools. Do you see any scenario where you sign any legislation to eliminate property taxes in exchange for higher sales or income taxes, if that legislation ever got to your desk?
I don't know. As you'll recall, in my first budget, I proposed a property tax relief, which was a shift of about $4 billion from local property taxes to the state, and it was a reduction of $4 billion in property taxes and then some protections for taxpayers so that local taxing authorities wouldn't come back to tax, find some other way to tax them in the future. 2/3 in my area, and I think in most areas, it's around 2/3, 60% of the tax bill for property taxes is the school tax. The other two are the county and local municipal tax. And the biggest chunk of that is the education tax. And schools are trying, I think, to come up with the funds in the absence of the state doing its share. I think we're in the 30%, 35, 37% range in terms of supporting public education. My goal in the first term, that effort was to get it up closer to 40s to 50%. And so I think that's appropriate, but I don't have a specific plan to do that. I think the plan that I proposed made it through the House, at least portion of what I proposed, and then died in the Senate.
So, in focusing on school property taxes on this, is it your preference, obviously, to try and reduce school property taxes, because you think school property taxes are necessary to keep skin in the game?
Yeah, I'm in talking to a lot of. I'm reluctant to want to take the authority fully away from local taxing authorities, and I think the plan that my opponent is suggesting, or variants of it, would do just that. What I proposed in 2015 was instead to produce real property tax relief and then protect taxpayers, but leave a chunk of taxing authority in the hands of local authorities. So if they and their constituents figured they wanted to do more or less, they had the ability to do that.
To ask you this fast. In 2014, you set yourself up as a champion of open government and transparency. In the intervening 4 years, I can think of at least 3 major instances: the redaction of the medical marijuana applications, the lawsuit against news organizations seeking access to Amazon HQ2 records, and the firing of the Open Records Office director at the beginning of your tenure. Seemed to fly in the face of that commitment. I wonder how you square those actions with the promises of transparency that you made in 2014.
Well, I would first of all disagree that any of those 3 have anything to do with transparency. The first of those,
yeah, they were quite dark. Those documents, not transparent at all.
Yeah, but again, I think in any transparency, you have to balance the competing needs of people for confidentiality and openness. In the Amazon case, I don't know anybody. First of all, that will be transparent when it comes up when and if it comes up for a vote. If it's anything under consideration, I think should be just that. It should be something that people can say what they feel and not because it may or may not have any import at all. So I don't think that's an issue of transparency. On the medical marijuana, trying to do this in an objective fashion to keep lobbyists, keep special interests out of the process and try to make it as fair as possible. And so that meant we wanted in this new industry to keep the names of the applicants, especially the unsuccessful applicants, to be out of the limelight. And then I think the third one you mentioned was the open records. He was in fact confirmed. That didn't have anything to do with my commitment to open records. In fact, the day I was inaugurated, I had a meeting of my entire cabinet and said, we want to make sure that we are transparent and have open records. And I had his predecessor lead the seminar with my cabinet. So I take transparency very seriously. I have, for example, released my tax returns. I have given access to reporters and have more, I think, more press conferences than most of my, not all my predecessors. And I will continue to do that if I get a second term.
I'd like to pivot to abortion really quickly. The appointment of Judge Kavanaugh, or rather the confirmation of Judge Kavanaugh of the Supreme Court. There's a very real possibility now that abortion could eventually be returned to the states. If that happens on your watch, what specific actions would you take to protect a woman's right to choose?
First of all, I think this issue is the woman's right to choose. It's about the choices that the person most directly involved makes. I don't think anybody believes that choice is not involved. Nature has given human beings a choice. The question is who's going to exercise it, bureaucrats, politicians, or the person most directly involved. The compromise that has existed since the 1970s has been Roe v. Wade. If this new court that has swung to the right, and even more so now with the Kavanaugh confirmation, if they threaten Roe v. Wade, then here in Pennsylvania, I will continue to do what I've done and stand as a backstop for any legislation that seeks to interfere with the right of a woman to make whatever choice she feels is the appropriate one.
On that, would you, because in talking with Beth, she said expand the protections that are given women in that scenario. So would you want to remove some of the restrictions that exist now, like even go beyond the 24 weeks, or I mean, is there any?
I support the compromise that was made in Roe v. Wade, and I think I would continue to stand and defend that.
So whatever exists now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay.
I guess on the backside of that too, Governor, if the administration should enact the gag order on Title X funds for healthcare providers, what steps would you take to make sure that they'll be able to counsel patients on abortion?
Well, I'll support any legislation that would allow that to happen in Pennsylvania and veto any effort to impose a state-based gag rule.
Steph, did you want to give a question?
Yes. Where do you think we stand on recreational marijuana legalization in the future of it?
Of course, I ran 4 years ago on decriminalizing possession of recreational marijuana. At this point, I'm not ready to sign or promote legislation that legalizes it in Pennsylvania.
You had said earlier this year you didn't think the state was ready. Do you still?
I'm not ready to sign it.
Why not?
I'm just not ready. I think we ought to. I would like to see what 6 states that have legalized recreational marijuana, see what their experience is, and they are approaching it in different ways, and how they tax it, how they regulate it, and I think we can learn a lot from that. I mean, and I think that would be just a very prudent thing to make sure we're seeing what their experiences are, and I think that would be a good thing to let the citizens of Pennsylvania see what their experiences are.
Is there a scenario where you could see lifting the moratorium on drilling on state land?
No.
What if that was kind of part of a deal that, okay, you'll get a severance tax if you agree to lift that? Would you agree to that?
No, I can't see any. I hate hypotheticals. I can't see any circumstance under which I would trade that for a severance tax.
you've been pushing for extraction tax on natural gas drilling for a few years.
Every year I've been in office, thank you.
If you're reelected second term, what do you think you could do to get it over the goal line?
Well, keep in mind, it's actually passed the Senate, and I think it would have passed the House, and that time it had been allowed to come up for a vote. The procedural, endless amendments just basically just wore people down. It never came up for an actual floor vote. But I think my numbers were we actually had the votes. This is a very popular thing. It's called a severance tax. It's really not, and it's I think right now 75% of Pennsylvanians support it. It's a tax that 80% of it would be paid by non-Pennsylvanians. And right now, all of you, actually, as you know, pay a severance tax. Texas, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Alaska, they all charge, they call it different things, but it's basically a severance tax. And it gets embedded in the price of the product. So if you buy plastic, you fill your tank up with gasoline from one of those states, or in any other way use their product in heating your home, the price of what you pay includes that severance tax. So Pennsylvania is the only major natural gas producing state, the major natural gas producing state in the country without a severance tax. And it's really interesting because we are paying to help the schools of Texas and Oklahoma and Louisiana and Alaska. We are paying to fix their bridges and their roads because what we pay is embedded, according to the Tax Foundation, in the price of the products that we consume that come from those states that have a severance tax. So Pennsylvania does not have that tax, so no one else is helping us pay for our schools and our roads and our bridges, and I think that's wrong.
Opponents of this proposal will say, well, we have this tax in the form of the impact fee already, and they even tried to rebrand it as an impact tax at one point in committee, I think in the House. Every proposal I've seen come down the pike retains the impact fee in some way.
Yes.
Why does that continue to be a part of the conversation? If you're in earnest about a severance tax, why not move to repeal the impact fee in whole and kind of just end that argument?
I think there's some first of all, it's in place, and so that's an important issue. I think the second thing is it does direct funds to areas that are most directly affected by the drilling. So that areas that are most in need of roads, because there's now heavy traffic over those roads, and other things, other public goods specific to those local areas. I think the impact fee addresses that. The proposal that I've made and that others have made is that you take the impact fee, keep it in place, impose a severance tax on top of it, but the combination of those taxes are right in line with what Texas and Oklahoma and Louisiana are charging. Doesn't make us non-competitive. The thing about Pennsylvania's natural resources is that we're right. This natural resource is unique in that it is right in the middle of the market. So my old company, we had residential decking and railing, for example, that was made from some of the feedstock that comes out of the ground in Pennsylvania. But we had to make it in Texas, because that's where the gas was when I was in business. And we'd have to transport that. The richest market in the country is Maine to Florida, and we'd have to transport across the country. Depending on the price of diesel fuel, that would be a 5 to 15% premium that we'd have to pay to. Now, with the natural gas right here, with the cracker plant creating the feedstock for things like wolf decking and railing. I don't own the company anymore, by the way, sold it. But it's not too great a stretch to suspect that it won't be long before manufacturers are sprouting up all around that cracker plant. We've looked at, my administration's looked at other opportunities, and with the natural gas we have here, we could support another 1 or 2 cracker plants in addition to the one that's at the Shell plant that's out there now. So Pennsylvania is in an unusual situation. No one else, as far as I know, has this. We have the natural resource, and we're in the middle of the market. And I think that's going to be a good thing for all of us. What we have to do is make sure that this industry succeeds, and I think one of the ways to do that, to make sure it succeeds here in Pennsylvania, is to create more winners, and a reasonable severance tax would do that. We can go to somebody in a place that doesn't get a whole lot of money from the impact fee, because they're not where the gas is, and you could say, your schools are going to be better if we have this severance tax. Your schools are going to be better if we have a healthy gas industry in Pennsylvania. So I actually think a reasonable severance tax along the lines that I've been proposing would actually be a good thing for the gas industry, and much of the industry has actually come around to that way of thinking.
On the topic of school safety, do you think that the $60 million that we invested in these grants for this year, do you think that that is enough going forward? Would you like to see that ramped up, or what other initiatives do you have in mind with dealing with school safety?
But don't forget we have a school safety fund that every year we appropriate money in the general fund. This year $10 million. So the $60 million is over and above what we've been doing on a yearly basis. And I think it remains to be seen if that's enough. I don't know. It's certainly more money than we've ever invested in school safety before, and it really comes on the heels of the school safety task force, where we've gone around and spent the spring and early summer asking educators what they think we ought to be doing. And most of it came down to communicate better, more robust communications between teachers and parents and law enforcement officials all around the state. And so I'm assuming what we'll see, the $60 million will be dispersed according to decisions made by the Pennsylvania Commission on Crime and Delinquency. And it'll be interesting to see what they allocate money for, but and how effective that is. But right now I'm hoping that will do a lot of everything we need to make sure that our schools and our kids and our teachers are safe.
But you see that $60 million being something that continues year after year, like along with that $10 million?
That was a one-time thing. The $10 million is year after year, and that I see continuing. And we'll see. I think the General Assembly and I will sit down and try. That was a bipartisan effort to get that money.
Earlier this year, you vetoed that direct formulary bill that came down the pike, with the backing of the state's business community. You did say that it was that it would save money for businesses and insurers, yet you chose to veto it anyway.
Yeah, let me just point out, first of all, I am from the business community.
Okay.
I think I'm the only person ever running for governor who chaired a Chamber of Commerce and was on the state chamber board. So, we can argue about what is good and what the business community wants, but I think I have a pretty good sense of what a business needs. And what I was concerned about in that bill was not whether it would save money or not, but whether it would actually be a good thing for the people that it was whose needs it was trying to address. I was specifically concerned that this bill would insert politicians between a doctor and patient and come up with some broad one-size-fits-all idea as to what you ought to be getting if something happens to you. And I think that's especially dangerous when it comes to the kinds of workers' comp claims that someone might make if he or she is a police officer or a firefighter. You know, the people who we depend on most, I think they might be the last people. I'm not sure. There might be someone I'd less want to see have a politician intrude in that relationship, but I think a doctor is probably in the best position to see what that person needs in that particular case. To the extent that there was some concern that we didn't want to promote or enable further evidences of addictive behavior or fuel the substance use disorder problem, the Department of Labor and Industry, my administration, modified the policy on workers' comp claims when it came to drugs to make sure that we were not, and did a number of things to make sure we were not adding to the problem of substance use disorder. And to the extent that was one of the things in that bill, I thought that was a good thing, and I tried to take that out and turn that into policy within the administration. To the extent it was inserting the politician between the doctor and patient, I didn't support that.
Your competitor has pointed to this $1 million infusion from the pharmacy PAC.
Okay.
And said that was evidence that you might not have been acting with entirely pure interest there. Would you care to respond to that?
That's nonsense.
Okay.
I mean, I'm promoting campaign finance reform, and I will continue to do that, but I've been in politics for 3 years and 8 months now? You can do the canvas, something like 8 or 9 months. And I got into politics because I wanted to bring the values I think are important to Pennsylvanians into this office. I am not somebody who is tainted by outside influences. If I agree with you, I agree with you. If I don't, I don't, and we can have a conversation, but I do what I think is right.
When you talk about campaign finance reform, what is it that you would like to see happen there?
In campaign finance reform, I think, and I'm open to conversation about what this ought to be, but some cap on, some limits on giving. We ought to make sure that we are not leaving ourselves open to the suspicion that money drives politics, and I think some limits akin to what they have at the federal level and some municipalities in Pennsylvania have would be appropriate. As to what that specific limit ought to be, I'm open to conversation. I just think we need to move beyond where we are now, which is no limits at all on personal contributions. I think that's wrong.
And do you see any further action, if reelected, to deal with this unfunded pension liability that everybody says the pension law that you did sign addresses, prevents us from getting into this situation going forward, but what about this huge unfunded?
Yeah, that's a good question. There are three elements to the pension problem in Pennsylvania. One was the design, which I think we dealt with in a way that the Wall Street Journal Editorial Board and the Washington Post Editorial Board seem to think made sense, which I'm not sure when those two agreed on anything, but they agreed on that. The second issue is management fees, and we dealt with that to a certain extent with the pension, but I think we have more work to do, and again, there's bipartisan support for really doing something about that. And then, as you point out, the third issue is the unfunded pension liability. It built up over years because we didn't pay our bills, because I think the plan might have been too rich, and that goes back to a Republican administration, the design of that. So that is the legacy of the past, and you're absolutely right. That's something that has to be dealt with. If we don't do anything other than do what I've been doing, which is pay our bills, then that goes way around, depending on your assumptions on return, actuarially goes away around 2035. And be a huge drop in annual expenditures just because that goes away given the current life expectancies. And so if we do nothing but pay our bills, it does go away thanks to the new design, which is why that's key. If we can figure out something that enjoys bipartisan support to address that legacy of the past, I would be all ears.
I wanted to ask you questions about sort of two things that are kind of dangling out there. One was this idea of early retirements for state employees that you floated, I think, in the 2017 budget. And we got quite some number of questions about whatever became of that, if that issue might be revisited.
I'm not sure. We have, I think, I've been focusing on trying to streamline government. Mm-hmm. And we have thousands of fewer state workers now than we did when I took over, and I haven't fired anybody or laid anybody off. These are people who've gone through normal retirement, and that seems to have worked well. Our operating expenses have been fairly flat, and that's the kind of thing I will continue to look for ways to streamline. For example, merging Department of Corrections and Board of Probation and Parole, trying to merge with limited success for agencies in the human services area, but even without the merger, working on ways to share services like HR, IT, things like that. Call centers.
Right.
One of the things, if in a siloized bureaucracy, is that it's not that friendly to people calling in. I have a problem. I'm not sure if it's a human service problem or a health problem or an aging problem or a drug and alcohol problem. It's a problem, and it's my problem. If you combine call center functions and people are cross-trained so that they can say, well, you want this person in this agency, it strikes me that's a better thing than the silos we had. And it also turns out to be more cost-effective. So I have looked for ways to do that, and one of the reasons we have been able to put money into the rainy day fund, and hope to do it again this year, at the end of this year, fiscal year, is because we've been looking for ways to make government work more efficiently. Not the slash and burn that I think is traditional in politics, where you just say, okay, I need to cut expenses, so I'm just going to cut. But look for strategic ways to make government work better in a more streamlined fashion. And so those are things, just normal attrition, being able to figure out how to make things work better with fewer people.
And the other question dealt with the state's gas tax. There was an issue for a while there with some portion of...
You're talking about the gasoline tax?
The wholesale gasoline tax, with some a disproportionate amount of that money being diverted away from motor license fund and into the operations of the state police. Has that been balanced out in any way? Where does that stand?
Not yet. As you know, in the last 2 budgets, I made a proposal, simple proposal to say, right now, the problem is that a municipality can say, we don't want to have our own police force. We'll turn it over to the state police, and it's at no cost. Well, there is no such thing as a free lunch, and the cost actually is in the money that's taken out of things that, better roads and better bridges that we could have if we invested the money there. So I proposed saying, if you want to use the state police, per capita fee, $25, very modest. I think it's $200 and some if you actually have a police force. Just as an opening, and I tried that both in the last budget and the budget before that. So far, I have not had success, but people are talking about it, and people recognize the challenges that creates for both the state police and for our roads and bridges that we really recognize we need to invest in. So I suspect that conversation will continue. We'll figure this out.
Do you see a situation, if you were reelected, where you'd have to raise broad-based taxes such as income tax or sales tax to deal with some other challenges?
I don't foresee that. No.
Would that be a commitment you'd be willing to make, that if you're reelected you won't raise income tax or sales tax?
A commitment? No. I do not like those kind of... Who can see what's going to happen over the next 4 years?
But at this point...
I don't have any plans to do that.
What do you think is your opponent's greatest misunderstanding about what it means to be governor?
That's a good question. I don't know. I haven't probed Scott's mind, but I think I can say the biggest surprise to me was that things were actually worse than I suspected, and that might just be true of everybody who takes an office and assumes office. That wow, this is actually worse than I thought, and maybe he would be surprised at that as well.
Talk about public schools. I want to ask about colleges. What steps could be done to make college more affordable? It's such a big issue for kids and families.
Yeah. Well, that's a great question. I think one thing is that the state needs to recognize its responsibility to post-secondary education and pre-basic education, just like we need to step up, and we have. Well, I've been governor to early childhood education, and I think the same is true of post-secondary education, including non-college. So I have my PA SMART initiative, which is tens of millions of dollars into career and technical education. We're doing more with dual enrollments, more with community colleges, more with apprenticeship programs, and I think we need to do more of those kinds of things. So part of what the answer to your question is that the state needs to recognize that it has an investment responsibility there. Then I've been working with college presidents in an informal set of meetings just to talk about this. What can we do to make education more affordable? We simply cannot afford as a society, and our economy cannot afford to have people graduating from college with the levels of debt that they have right now. This is not sustainable. So we need to do something about that, and I will continue to look for ways to address that.
There was a study that the State System and Commission, State and Higher Education Commission, talking about potential for some broad sweeping changes. What would you like to see the state system? What changes would you like to see the state system make?
Well, we have a new chancellor, and I think he is very talented. And the chair of the State System of Higher Education, Cindy Shapiro, is a very talented person. And together, the three of us actually have I think a real focus on what we can do to make that state system more relevant, better, more affordable. And as you know, we're starting with some specific things at Cheyney University to turn that around. That's probably a 3 or 4 year project, but we've made the first step. And I think that's the first step in figuring out what the new, relevant, energized state system looks like. we need to make sure that post-secondary education is accessible, affordable, and relevant to the needs of a 21st century society and economy. And I'm bound and determined to do that, and I think the new chancellor is, and I know that the chair of the State System Board is.
What impresses you with the new chancellor so far?
I'm really impressed. I actually had a hand in recruiting him. Once the board decided on the person they wanted, it was a matter of convincing him then that he wanted to come to Pennsylvania. I mean, he was a big executive at the Gates Foundation, has impeccable academic credentials, and is a real strikes me as a very energetic person who balances the sensitivity to the academic issues that higher education faces in places like the state system, but also an understanding of how things need to change. And he's excited. I mean, what I really liked about him was he seems excited by the opportunities that the state system has for change, for charting a new course for higher education. We all think, Cindy and Dan and I think that the future of higher education could very well go through Pennsylvania.
Along those lines there, I thought you wanted with the RAND Corporation recommended that from some very dramatic changes to the state system. And if the legislature would send you a bill to move the state system schools to make them part of the state-related institutions, or to roll them off and make certain ones state-related, would you support that?
Yeah, I think the legislature is really interested in sort of the people on the ground, the professors, the students, the state system board, the new chancellor. I think why don't we? Those are the real experts. Let's see what they suggest. And I think in the first round of hearings, which will be in March or so next year, for the next year's budget, we're going to see the starts of some really interesting ideas come out of the state system. So I wouldn't want to prejudge things or move too quickly. I think the idea right now for all of us is to say, okay, what do you have in mind here? Let's see. Let's judge it critically. But what do you have in mind? And I'm looking forward to that.
In 2014, you campaigned quite enthusiastically on behalf of the Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act. Your competitor has proposed rolling that expansion back. In the intervening 3 years and 8 months, can you point to specific either economic or health-related outcomes that point to the success of that expansion or the justification for that expansion?
Well, let me start with 720,000 Pennsylvanians who now have health insurance who didn't have it before. One of the challenges I think all of us have in Pennsylvania is to make sure our hospitals in rural areas, smaller hospitals, that they would be devastated by a rollback of expanded Medicaid. The opioid epidemic, Medicaid actually covers substance use disorder. And so we have 125,000, I think, Pennsylvanians whose treatment centers are being reimbursed by Medicaid for their treatment. So all those things, whatever impact they have had on health insecurity, which is bad for an economy, addressing that issue of health, addressing the opioid epidemic, of addressing the need for rural health centers. And those other health institutions that have been working on the margins, even the established ones, the uncompensated care challenge, that has been addressed by this. So I think we've gone a long way in terms of helping individual families with something that I think has made a difference.
Talking the opioid epidemic, I mean, your administration's taken some fairly significant steps with the Centers on Excellence, is the treatment, the expansion of treatment beds, the emergency declaration. I mean, what is left out there?
We still need
that's not being done already.
I think we still need more beds. We have done a lot. I mean, if you go through the list, the Narcan for emergency responders, we've saved brought thousands of people back from overdoses, so saved thousands of lives. We have 50 now centers of excellence that are basically helping people navigate their way through the system. That's 10, 15,000 Pennsylvanians who are getting advice and ongoing outpatient care that they wouldn't have gotten had those not been set up. We have now more opportunities for warm handoffs. We have prescribing guidelines that the medical societies have done. I think almost all of them have now medical guidelines. We've worked with medical schools and deans of medical schools to change the curriculum. We have the prescription drug monitoring program that has been strengthened. We have prescription limits on things like opioids that are prescribed in an emergency room, 3 days. I think we have limits on what any doctor can do in prescribing opioids for minors. Those aren't just voluntary recommendations or guidelines. Those are limits. We have, I think gone from, in all these things, I think there are like 12, 13, or 14 different things we've done. We still need more beds. And we still need to recognize that this is a substance use disorder problem. It's a medical problem, not just an opioid issue. We also have to make sure we're balancing this out, because some people, opioids are very helpful in terms of some ailments, and we have to make sure that we are not sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater here. So I think we still have to figure out, keep working on striking that appropriate balance. I think we still have to figure out what more we can do for other forms of substance use disorder. There are other drugs, there are other addictive substances out there, and we have to address the medical condition. And I think we need more treatment centers. We still need to do a better job of saying, okay, you've reached rock bottom, you recognize you need help. Don't call this, get on the waiting list. Let's move right in at this moment. So we still have work to do.
Just to follow up on that, you're seeing more and more treatment centers already open up the last few years. How do you make sure that these treatment centers are actually providing the help people need? I mean, as you put more money and resources into this, the key question is making sure these people are getting treatments that really work and aren't just,
right.
Effective.
I think that's really important, and I think that's where these centers of excellence are to help people. The 50 centers of excellence to really help people navigate their way through and say, you might want to think about that one. That one actually, for what you have, is really important. And there are two things. One is to make sure you're not being scammed. The other thing is to make sure that whatever treatment protocol you decide you need, it's appropriate for your needs. It's sort of like Anna Karenina and O2. All unhappy families are different, and all happy families are alike. This is like no two substance use disorder sufferers are alike. Each suffers in a different way, and I think the centers of excellence are an effort to say, in your case, you have this combination of issues you want to make sure we're dealing with, and so it's some of the obvious ones out there that might be scams. You want to make sure that no one does that, but even over in the legitimate area, you want to make sure that the legitimate treatment center or treatment protocol that you're taking on is the right one for you.
A couple of environmental questions here for you. Today, funding for Growing Greener has been substantially reduced. Do you support a significant new influx of funding, and if so, how would that be paid for?
Yeah, I think as it would be paid for, I do support it, and it would, as in the past, would be paid for by a bond issue. The idea behind that is that if we do a good job with things in a healthy environment that actually has an economic payback. I have tried to do things, like new methane regulations to make sure that we are recognizing that while we have natural resources in Pennsylvania, that we need to exploit those natural resources in an environmentally responsible way. And whether it's Growing Greener or some other way, I will continue to try to work to make sure that we are being responsible in the exploitation of these natural resources.
The other one is, how will you make sure that Pennsylvania improves its performance in reducing water pollution?
Again, want to make sure that we're doing. First of all, we need the right policies and make sure that we are in fact pursuing the right policies. I think we start from actually maybe a stronger point than maybe we suspect. One of the big things, for example, in the Chesapeake Bay issue, Pennsylvania is a big contributor of nitrates, things that come from point pollution,
Right.
but more often runoff. One of the interesting things is that for some reason farmers have become the villains in this set piece, and actually there is no one with a greater incentive to be good stewards of the environment than our farmers. They keep open space. They don't want that stuff that's running off. That's potential fertilizer and food for the crops that they're growing. So I'm working hard to make sure that we do a better job of partnering with our sisters and brothers in the agricultural industry to make sure that we're doing everything we can to keep our environment clean. I think there are more things that we can do, but I will continue to look for ways to improve in our water and air purity.
All right. We are sure by now, after last Monday, you've seen the error of your ways. Would you commit now to another debate with Senator Wagner? Maybe two?
No.
Why not?
Again, the campaign is 5.5 months, and during that 5.5 month period, I have done my best to make sure that I do as robust a job as I can, as an active a job as I can, to get my positions and my values out, so that when election day comes, the people will know exactly where I stand and what I might do, and in fact, in my case, what I have done over the last 3 years and 8 months. And I think my opponent's doing the same thing. I'm not sure what the magic is about a formatted debate. I think the key is to make sure that the people on election day have heard everything they need to hear to make the informed decision we need them to make.
Would you have said the same thing the first time you ran?
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure what the magic is. What my primary had 14 or so debates. And the general election, 3 debates. I'm not sure what the magic of that particular format. What we need is to make sure information is getting out. We need to make sure that voters have what they need to make a decision on November 6th.
And so you don't see any benefit to having your challenger challenge you on your responses?
Yeah, he's doing that all the time, every day.
But to your face.
He's doing that too. I mean, I think things like this are really helpful for the voters to hear directly what the candidate is saying, and I think you had my opponent too.
So now we can buy beer and wine in grocery stores. You tout that as one of your achievements for your first term. Do you see any further liberalization of our liquor laws that you would like to pursue in a second term?
I think we ought to see how this works out. One of my goals is obviously to make this more convenient for the citizens of Pennsylvania. And having grown up in Pennsylvania and been born here, it is a big deal to be able to buy wine and beer in the grocery store. That's the first real change. People have talked about it for years. I was a young kid when they started talking about it, and I'm an old man, and nothing has really been done up until now. So I'm proud of that, and I'd like to see how this works. Whatever you think about the system in Pennsylvania, it is owned by the people of Pennsylvania, and we need to be responsible stewards of that asset that the people of Pennsylvania own. And I will continue to do what I've tried to do, and will try to do if I'm given another 4 years, to make that asset as productive and valuable as it can be.
Do we need a state system going forward, a state-owned liquor wine system? You already can buy beer and wine in stores, and it seems like an inevitable step to be able to buy liquor in the grocery stores or some other markets. At some point, can we say the state system had its place, but it's no longer necessary?
I'm sure that if any of us was alive back in 1933, we might have made a different decision than we made now. It turns out that the governor of Pennsylvania at that point was a very strict prohibitionist, and he decided that liquor was not going to pass the lips of Pennsylvanians. He pretty damn well succeeded. So I'm not sure what decision any of us would have made in 1933, but that's not the point. The point is, where are we right now? And what do we do with the situation that we have right now? And simply liquidating it or giving it away, I think, is irresponsible from the point of view of the citizens of Pennsylvania who own this. whether I like it or not, I am a steward. I'm a guardian of that asset, and I don't think it's my job to just fritter it away or give it away. I think it's something that needs to be taken seriously, and we need to make that as valuable an asset for the people of Pennsylvania as it might be.
Some of the, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Okay, just on the farm show, leasing the farm show, that really irritated the legislators who felt like you really overstepped your bounds on that. I mean, is there any regrets on your part that you maybe weren't more open about that with the lawmakers, because they really felt like that was something that you did something without cluing them in or letting them?
I actually did clue them in, and actually it was proposed before, and something coming out of a business, I mean, that's standard practice. Sale leasebacks, that was a leaseback, same kind of thing. It was basically monetizing cash flow. And I think there's a lot of talk about bringing business principles to government, and that's pure and simple what I did there.
So would you do the same thing with, because you did propose outsourcing the management of the wholesale system for the liquor system, so is that something that you would?
I will look. I continue to look for ways to, again, make that asset a more valuable one for the people of Pennsylvania, and to look at things that we're doing that may not be quite as efficient as they could be, and that's what I did when I was in business, and I'll do that, continue to do that as governor. And when I see something, I will propose it.
Under what circumstances might you be amenable to a consolidation of school districts?
I'm willing to have any conversation, but I'm not sure that consolidation is necessarily the answer to things. The other states have done countywide consolidation. I'm not sure. Maybe there's some that have regional consolidation. We have to balance, I think, the accessibility of schools that we have right now, and to teachers, to superintendents, to school board members. They're closer to their communities with 500 school districts than they would be if we went down to 100, for example. I don't think there is an easy answer to this. I think we need to look for ways to make our education system better, more responsive for every citizen, regardless of zip code. And I'm open to looking at how we do this. I don't have a sort of a ideological attachment to anything.
States all over the country have been jockeying the Amazon 2 headquarters. Obviously, Philly and Pittsburgh have put out their bids. Aside from Amazon, what are the other type of businesses that Pennsylvania should be making a better pitch to attract to Keystone State?
Well, first of all, I think we ought to make sure that people who are doing business here recognize what a great deal this is. I built a business here. Now, I sold in 2015. I think we were in 30-some states. We had big facilities in Massachusetts, down in Georgia, and elsewhere in the country. So I had a fairly good perspective on how Pennsylvania fared in terms of other states, and this is a great state to do business. So I think one of the things I like doing is talking to businesses, say, just in general, this is a good state to do business. I think in the eastern part of the state, there's a real life sciences bent. We have great universities and a network almost of companies that are in the life sciences space that I think are doing a good job. And out in the West, we have a growth of businesses surrounding the natural resources we have out there, the gas industry, but we also have a blooming robotics business out there, and again centered around like Carnegie Mellon, University of Pittsburgh, and some of the other great universities. So we have a great location. Pennsylvania is the Keystone State. Obviously, if you look around here, you can see that distribution is a big thing. How many million square foot distribution centers and fulfillment centers that we see growing up, just flourishing in this area. And I think that's something that Pennsylvania is a natural for distribution. Again, with the universities, human capital is a big thing. we could do a better job with investment capital, I think, but that's starting to grow. But that would be the one area I think I would argue, we might want to take a little closer look at. But the rest of this is a great place to live. It's a great place to do business. It's a beautiful state. It's great history. Second or third highest number of seats in higher education in the country. And these are good universities, from small liberal arts colleges to, the University of Pennsylvania, University of Pittsburgh, Penn State, Carnegie Mellon, Lehigh. It's just a good place to do business, and it's a great place to live. Having raised a family here, that's an incentive to bring good employees. So I think that there are a lot of things we can do. Again, I think we can focus on. I'm not sure government should ever try to pick winners in the private sector, but the East is in good shape for life science, the West for robotics, the whole state for distribution, and we could focus on doing a better job there. But just any business, this is we know how to make things here in Pennsylvania. So this is a good state.
I'd like to ask you to be more reflective, if I could. I mean, when you came in 14, you had one sort of relationship with the General Assembly. There's certainly been an arc since then. You're at a better place, I guess, is fair to say. I mean, what have you learned about dealing with the legislature over these last 4 years?
Look, I came to Pennsylvania, and it was moving in a direction that I thought was wrong. As a citizen of Pennsylvania, a lifelong citizen, I was not happy with my state. That's why I ran for governor. I wasn't running for student council, and I wanted to make a change. I wanted to change the direction that Pennsylvania was going in, and I've done that. And it's been a 4-year process, and it started with me basically saying, in a nice fashion, I don't confuse strength with decibels, and I was trying to say, this is not the right way to go. We're smoke and mirrors budgets, not good. Phony pension reform, phony liquor privatization, not the right thing. Let's have a conversation about this. And over the 3 years and 8 months I've been governor, I think you look at that, you call it arc, the narrative, was that it's all, I didn't change anything. I don't think the legislature changed it. We just looked at, I think American politics too often looks at all the differences, and we exalt in the differences, and I think we all decided in Pennsylvania that let's start focusing on those areas where we actually might find some common ground. And every once in a while we can recognize those differences because we have them. And I think that's what's happened. And so Pennsylvania is not where we need it to be, but it's moving in a new direction, 180 degrees from where it was when I started. And I think that's a result of the changes that the legislature and I have worked together to achieve. I'm very proud of what Pennsylvania has done to turn this ship around.
What kind of role will John Fetterman have in your administration, assuming the election goes the way you'd like it to go?
I'd like to. I think we will continue. We've talked and we'll continue to talk about what that role is. The constitutional role of the lieutenant governor is very limited, I think, to presiding over the Senate and presiding over the Board of Pardons. But obviously, I have talked to him about what kinds of things he might want to do, and I think he's a very bright and energetic person, and I look forward to sitting down and having a focused conversation, if and when we win this, to say, okay, how can we allocate and delegate decision making and responsibility to you in a more robust way. I think there's some interesting opportunities. He's a very thoughtful and smart guy.
Are you, what have you found in common with him once you've got to know him a little bit in these last few months?
We're both from York County.
There's that. I think you knew that going in, but
we don't have much hair on the top of our heads. No, I think he really, and he showed this as mayor of Braddock. He got into that job as a volunteer. He was at AmeriCorps, working to teach students and get them on the way to a GED. And it was doing that he said, I think the political system could be a little more supportive. And that's essentially the way I see things, that our political system, I was chairman of the United Way, the Chamber of Commerce, the York College Board of Trustees, all those things in York, but I recognize that there's certain things that we need to do together, and that's why we have a democratically elected government. I think he sees the power of government to actually engage in a more, a limited government, but in a more significant and helpful way in the lives of citizens. That's what he did as mayor, and I think that's what he'll do as lieutenant governor.
Jan mentioned board requirements. Any wavering on your moratorium? Death penalty?
No.
You don't see that changing?
No. The moratorium, I put that into place, as I said to Jan, with the thought the Senate had a bipartisan commission looking at the death penalty, and that took a number of years, and they took a lot of testimony, and I read their report, and the report recommended that Pennsylvania continue the moratorium.
We have an interesting question here from a reader. Given everything that's going on with the Me Too movement, this recent controversy over Judge Kavanaugh, shouldn't Pennsylvania teach consent and issues of sexual violence in its sexual ed classes or health classes?
Yeah. Now, Pennsylvania, by the way, was the first state to sign up for the It's On Us campaign. So, in terms of that, we are already doing that in college campuses, and I'm not sure that was about post-secondary education, schools, yeah. But in our schools, we ought to be making sure people recognize the limits of their, in terms of social interaction and exactly what consent means. So yeah, we need to continue their job. Again, I'm taking that seriously. I did in the first 3 years and 8 months I've been in office, and I will continue if I'm given another 4 years.
Jan, last one.
Okay, well, will you continue to live in your home in York County, and will you continue to donate your full salary if reelected?
Yes. Yes.
All right, Governor, thanks very much.
Hey, thank you very much. Enjoyed this.